think we'll kick off now then. So thank you so much everyone for coming. Great to see so many of you here. So today Peter's just going to give his talk through his experience, and then we'll leave the questions till the end. So as usual, either just shout them out at the end or pop them on the chat and I'll shout them out for you. All Twitter handlers, please do tag us. I'll put my handle again on the chat in just a moment. Session will be recorded, and just while Peter's talking, if you could just make sure your mic is turned off, and it makes it nice and smooth for everyone else. But otherwise, Peter, go for it. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much, Annie. So hi, I'm Peter Wallace. This is slightly strange, I suppose, because you know, you kind of sort of, you know, you see it advertised and you think, oh, how many people are actually really interested in hearing about me, you know, and that's always quite sort of self-reflecting. So I'm glad at least some of you have turned up. If it was just an audience of Annie and me, I'd probably feel really embarrassed. Anyway, so I understand that, you know, I have a story about how my career progressed, and if there's some value in that for some of you, then I hope that helps you to understand kind of the choices that you can make and the sorts of things that you may learn from my experience. But, you know, everyone's experiences are different as they progress through their career. So, you know, this isn't the right way of doing things. It's just kind of my way. So, you know, I guess I'll start at the beginning, and I'm going to talk through kind of, you know, the major parts of my career and the sort of decisions I made at certain times. Sometimes those decisions are ones that, you know, I've reflected on and now understand in a bit more, you know, with a bit more self-awareness. At the time, I think some of them were maybe a little more impulsive at the time, or felt more impulsive. You know, you kind of see an opportunity and just jump at it. And then sometimes you don't always, you know, understand kind of why you were so attracted to it until you reflect. So there is an element of reflection in some of these choices, and hopefully that helps. But I'll start at the beginning anyway. So I went to university 4 years. I studied engineering science. I was looking at various different opportunities. What sort of job should I do? And you know, becoming an engineer in the civil engineering sense of the term, you kind of looked at it and thought, you know, I'm going to be stuck on a big, you know, 4-year, 10-year project to build the next 7 crossings, it was in those days, or a massive marina in Dubai or something like that. And, you know, it didn't really kind of feel dynamic enough for me. So I took a job at Anderson Consulting, as they were called then, as a management consultant, now Accenture, obviously, since they IPO'd in 2000. But, and, you know, I took that job because it sort of offered and was promised a lot of variety of different types of work. You could work in different industries, you could do different types of roles, you could work abroad or at home. You know, there was quite a lot of flexibility, and I kind of felt, you know, it doesn't really, I don't have to make any hard and fast choices at this point in my career, because I didn't really understand what I wanted to do when I was, you know, 23 or whatever. So, you know, that was kind of a choice which was made because it had flexibility to it. You know, I spent 10 years at Accenture and worked mostly in government and retail industry, mostly in the UK, well, actually totally in the UK, I think, and worked, my first big project really was on Nurse 2. So the National Insurance Recording System that processes all your national insurance contributions. There's some code there somewhere that was written by me, I suspect. So hopefully somebody's refactored it by now, because I wasn't actually that good at coding. In the 90s, it was quite tricky in respect that I seemed to spend my entire time searching for that elusive comma that I had in the wrong place. And you know, it didn't feel particularly satisfying to me writing C code as a young, newly qualified, well, I don't know, young graduate. So I kind of quickly got out of coding and into design work and architecture in particular, and was given a number of roles on Nurse 2 to design different parts of the architecture. To start with, it was sort of the batch architecture, which was processing everything on the overnight schedule, and it was a complex thing. It was a problem to solve. I enjoyed solving problems, and so that was sort of kind of the start of a career in architecture, which just sort of grew through Accenture. where you kind of got bigger and bigger bits to design and own, really resulting in being sort of the program architect at Argos, as it was one of our clients, on a big supply chain program they had, where I was responsible for all the different phases, the strategy, the different applications we were using, and all of that sort of responsibility. When I got to senior manager in Accenture, and when you get to senior manager in Accenture, you kind of have to either, sell or deliver. They're very keen. It's all about revenue, and you either sell it or you deliver it. And so as an architect, you're kind of like, well, I'm kind of involved in a bit of each because there's some pre-sales activity and there's obviously some delivery stuff to do, but I'm never really going to get the recognition and progress as quickly at this sort of stage of my career by being an architect. I'm going to have to either pivot and sell stuff or deliver stuff and be responsible for big programs of work or be responsible for service lines and offerings. So I kind of didn't really feel like there was much future for me at that point. And so I got headhunted by a guy who was working for Capgemini at the time, who basically sort of said, well, look, Peter, you're 10 years into one company, and you've got to kind of make your mind up whether you're going to be a one company man. And there's nothing really wrong with that, because there's plenty of people who spent 30 years at Accenture and had a very lucrative career. Or, you can be, you can learn more about architecture from a company like Capgemini that works a lot more with the open source community and TOGAF as it was, well, as it is, and look at how to become a better architect, really. And they have a proper architects community, and they really invest in that. And that really swayed me to go and join Capgemini. And I don't regret that decision to leave Accenture. I think if I'd stayed like some of my peers did, then I probably would have had a very typical Accenture sort of career. But Capgemini, I was taught a different sort of style of working, which I think I learned a lot from. So Accenture is very American-centric, command and control sort of environment. It's the Accenture way. We know best. We've done it before. Do it following the Accenture method, and you'll get the result at the end. It's what they pride themselves on, and it really underpins the success they have with their clients in delivery. Capgemini, on the other hand, is a French or Swiss-owned company, which are a lot more collaborative, and so it's all about actually listening and collaborating on what the solution might be, and doing a lot more workshops and those sorts of things. So it really taught me a lot more consulting skills around dealing and talking to people and listening, rather than just going, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do, stick with us and we'll get there, which was sort of Accenture's way. So that was quite interesting. I spent 4 years at Capgemini. I worked all in the government sector on the Aspire contract with HMRC. So I was working client side to start with, running a big architecture team on behalf of the HMRC CTO, and then worked supplier side on the outsourcing things, shaping up various different projects and propositions. And it kind of suited me at the time in my career, because I sort of got to the point where I just got married, and my wife was pregnant at the time with our first kid. So actually working for a large government department that works at a fairly slow pace, so there wasn't a lot going on all the time. Decisions would take 6 months to happen. Actually suited me in that part of my life, because I got to spend a lot of time working basically 9 to 5. And getting home on time and seeing my young baby and all those things. So I think it was quite interesting that if I'd stayed at Accenture, I probably wouldn't have had so much flexibility. I probably would have been working away from home a lot more, and I think that would have been detrimental to my work-life balance. So reflecting on that, I kind of feel like my career sort of went sideways for a bit. Certainly developed on the architecture side. I learned a lot more about that, but I had the space and time to basically become a father, and we had 3 kids over those 4 years. So that probably tells you something as well. When I got to sort of the end of those 4 years, and I got a bit bored, to be frank, because nothing was really happening at HMRC, and there was a whole bunch of public spending cuts and all sorts of things like that going on. So I was kind of starting to get a bit itchy feet, wanted a change of direction. And so I started applying for different roles and got this job at Camelot, who run the National Lottery, and as chief architect. And what was interesting about that was, first of all, my boss, the IT director, said to me, he said, this is your first proper job, because he never thought consultants actually did a proper job. And that sort of sticks with me now. And the reason why it does is because, as a consulting architect, you come in and you kind of go, this is what you want to do. This is the design for your system, whatever. Get on with it, and you'll get to the results. You'll get your benefits and all that sort of thing from doing this systems implementation. But at Camelot, I was there for 4 years, and the early decisions I made on the first program of work that I worked on, I had to make, I had to live with them. I went to work every day, and and if my perfect architecture was causing the support team to be called at 2 in the morning, they let me know about that when I got into work at 8:39. Oh, by the way, guys, your system's crap. It just fell over, and that's your fault. The design was wrong. So you kind of learn to be much more pragmatic and to not be so purist in some of the aspects of your architecture, but to be really centered on what is important. So I learned to be, I think, a lot more pragmatic in that role. And I also made friends for life. I'm still in contact with my team there, who've all kind of dispersed and gone on to do other things. But that's over the last 10 years, we still meet up at least 2 or 3 times a year. So and I can't say that for my previous sort of roles. So you feel like you really kind of belong to a family there, and that was a good thing for me. When the latter part of my career at Camelot, we basically rebuilt the whole digital channel from scratch. And so it was a whole new website, but it was a whole new infrastructure, new servers, new network switches, the whole caboodle from the ground up. And I worked on that program. It was fantastic. It was my first opportunity to work with an agile development team. And I really loved the way that they worked, the way they kind of, the cadence that they had, and the challenge that they gave back to me, who was trying to sort of, come up with the right way of doing things. And so I really enjoyed that, and I felt at Camelot that they weren't going to do another big program like that. They weren't going to redevelop their digital channel again. So there wasn't going to be that sort of challenge. So I started looking for new roles once we delivered the new digital channel, and applied for a number of different roles. And some of them were CTO jobs, some of them were head of strategy and architecture type roles. And at the time, I went for this job at EasyJet. It was as a head of strategy and architecture role at EasyJet, and I looked at it and went, I could do that. It's just up the road in Luton. The location works. The sorts of things they're asking for, I could do that, because they wanted somebody to own the technology strategy. They wanted somebody to basically devise that technology program of work and deliver it. Do board level stakeholder management. Yep, done that. It was all those sorts of things, and I thought I could do that. So I applied for the job, and the headhunter was very good at briefing me on the sorts of things that they were looking for in the interview. So I went to the interview, and I'd prepared really, really well for that interview. I'd read the company reports. I'd read, the website. I'd read, the strategy section of the company reports. So I could understand the programs of work that they had. They had a big program at the time called Turn Europe Orange, which was their strategy for basically becoming a big flag, a big airline across Europe. So I kind of had all of that knowledge, and I'd even sort of being kind of snooping on LinkedIn, trying to find pictures of people who were senior in EasyJet, and I found this new person they'd recruited who was the head of sort of business transformation, and I sort of recognised her picture. And when I was there for the interview, we were queuing up for coffee, and she came over to say hello to the guy who was interviewing me. And afterwards I went, oh, that was Rachel so-and-so, wasn't it? And he looked at me like, oh my God, how do you know her? And I was just like, oh no, I just done my research, And I think, and some of the feedback that I got, I didn't get the job, by the way. Some of the feedback I got was that I was very well prepared, and they were quite impressed by the background that I had. So I think it's always worth when you're going for a new role to obviously just put those time in to understand what they're looking for, and really do all that background reading. I'd even looked at things like I think the guy who was head of engineering had done a presentation at QCon or something about EasyJet architecture and the challenges they had. So I'd watched this sort of 25-minute presentation and knew quite a lot about their tech stack, and so I could talk knowledgeably about the things I would do to try and change that, and my approach I would have. Ultimately, the headhunter said I didn't get the job because they didn't feel I had enough experience of influencing board members. And that's where they felt I was a bit weak, and that's what they were really looking for. So I don't think they ever thought I couldn't do the job from a technology standpoint, but they felt that my people skills and my approach to trying to get the board on board with the technology change we were going to have to do just wasn't there. And you look back on that and you think, well, I guess that's just down to the fact I hadn't had that experience at that point in my career. I had spoken to board people at Camelot. I'd done presentations, but I hadn't really, convinced the board to do something, devised a program, and then spent 3 years delivering it. And that's really what they wanted. So I just didn't have the right experience that they were looking for. So I was successful, however, at getting my first CTO job at that point at a company called ETX Capital. And what's interesting about that is that Camelot is about 1,000 people in size, and obviously a £7 billion turnover for the National Lottery. So it's big. I mean, their website, if you look at it, they do more than £1 billion through the website. So as a digital channel, they were bigger than Tesco.com at the time. So you wouldn't imagine, if you were looking for a big e-commerce company in 2010, that you'd list Camelot up there as a £1 billion company. But they were bigger than Tesco.com. And also, I think if you looked at the website traffic that they had at the time, and if you discounted sort of social media networks, if you looked at companies that sold product online, they're in the top 10 websites in Europe. So it's those sorts of things that actually make you realize that the sorts of things you were doing I was doing at Camelot were quite big scale. And so you bring those stories out when you talk. And when I was talking to the guys at ETX, they were interested in those. So you've dealt with high velocity data, you've dealt with lots of visitors to a website, scalability, performance issues, all that sort of stuff. And that's what they were looking for. So I could relate my experience into the things they were looking for by my last sort of 4 years at Camelot. But it was a different role. It was a wider role. It wasn't just about doing the architecture work. It was about running the ops teams who managed all of their trading platforms and all the technology. So being responsible for the live service, as well as being responsible for the program of work, the engineering team, and at the time, the product guys as well. So it was a much wider role. But in the interview, I was keen to make sure they understood that, I could do the technology and strategy bits, and here's my experience that says I can do those bits. But I was also very clear that I'd never been responsible for the live service, because I wasn't at Camelot. There was a head of live service who was responsible for that. So it was a gap that I was going to have, but I had enough kind of experience to know what to do, and I trust the team, and don't worry, we'll work it out. But through the first few months of being at ETX, I didn't quite appreciate how quickly we needed to respond to certain incidents. And the team were a little slow off the mark sometimes, and I was getting angry phone calls from the CEO about, why am I dealing with this problem? You're the bloody CTO. Why aren't you, on top of this? So, at that point I thought, Christ, I don't, I feel exposed here. I don't have the experience of running a live service. So I went back to my colleague at Camelot, Mark Wheeler, who ran the live service. And I said to him, look, I'm struggling to understand how I should be approaching this, and how do I actually, do this aspect of my job. And so he gave me just a few pointers about the sorts of things you should talk to the teams about, the things that are important, and the things that you can kind of let slide to a degree. So it was really useful, but to recognize kind of where I was, exposed and weak in my experience, and then use my network and my friendships that I'd built up over the years to kind of just lean on them and get some advice was really powerful. What I've tend to find is most of the people you work with over the years will give you 15 minutes on the phone. Just ask. I'm going for this interview. I don't know anything about this aspect of the job. You do that day in, day out. What are the three key things that I need to be thinking about? People will always help if you ask. So it's always worth doing that, but recognize kind of where you're strong and where you're weak in the role. The other thing that was quite interesting about being successful at that CTO job that I got was that you have to sort of look at what aspects of the job are the same and what are different, and don't try and go for a role that's too different from what you do today. So with Camelot, it was all about National Lottery, which at the end of the day is online gambling, and it's regulated by the Gambling Commission in the UK. ETX Capital was all about spread betting on financial markets, and they're regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. But they had regulation in the UK, so I was used to working in a regulated business. And okay, they were financial services, but it was still kind of gambling. So I could understand the sorts of customers that they were going to be attracting, and I could leverage some of my knowledge around the way Camelot would market to their customer base, and would look at things like responsible gambling controls, and helping customers who obviously get into problems with that sort of side, and use that in conversations I had with ETX about how do you approach responsible marketing of your product. And we could have quite a good conversation about that, just because it was similar enough. I think if I'd gone for a job where it was maybe in the healthcare industry, I'd be sort of sat there thinking, I've got a hope in hell of getting this. I know nothing about the healthcare industry, so the industry's changing. The interaction in the customer base is completely different to what I'm used to dealing with, and the technology is probably a lot different. It's probably a lot more package basis rather than bespoke build. And so I think if there's too many variables that change, then actually it's probably too much of a step, too much of a leap in one go. But that ETX job was similar enough that I was successful. I suppose the other aspect of it was, I wasn't a CTO. It's always quite hard to get your first CTO job, but it's just a label. There's lots of different types of CTOs out there, and they all work in slightly different ways. And so, you'll find bigger organizations have CTOs where the CTO works for the CIO, and the CTO is responsible for effectively technology and strategy. So it's about what applications and what technology stacks are we going to use, and what's the sort of program of technology work we've got to underpin the business. And the live service and the kind of operational side of it all sits with the CIO. In smaller companies, it's all bundled into one role. In other companies, the CTO is really just a VP of engineering, and they've got other people doing other aspects of it, whether it be product or live service or security or whatever it might be. And so understanding kind of when somebody's advertising a CTO job, what kind of CTO job it is, and is that the sort of CTO job that I'm likely to be successful at getting, depending on your own experience and up to that point, it is absolutely key. And this one was, they were looking for somebody who was going to effectively give them that technology strategy for the next 3 years, and effectively deal with a whole bunch of technical debt that had built up over 10 years in their systems. So, that was something I felt, yeah, I could do that. The other interesting thing, sorry, it's a complete kind of download from my brain, so apologies if I'm going too quickly. I suppose the thing was with ETX Capital is that they're private equity owned, and so the sorts of people who were interviewing me were non-technical. They were trying to bring in the most senior technical person. There wasn't anybody that I was put in front of who was testing my technical skills and experience. They just took that as read. So what was helpful about that, especially when I was meeting the owners and the non-execs in that business, was that the headhunter would give me a little bit of insight into what that non-exec was bothered about the most. And one of them was bothered about marketing, and he basically wanted to understand how could he leverage all his marketing data to be better at marketing, and what was my view on that. So so I knew that as prep work. So I then went away, had to think about, so what sort of things have I done when I've been at Camelot working with the marketing team about how they market, given that they spend a lot of money doing lots of big campaigns and that sort of stuff. So I brought that conversation, and it was just a conversation about marketing. It wasn't a conversation about technology, but it was about customers and how they respond to different types of prompts and campaigns, and how the technology could change that and be more responsive and more personalized and those sorts of things. So understanding kind of what they're talking about and what they're interested in is key. The other non-exec I met was interested in cybersecurity risks. That was his big thing. He was petrified that there was going to be a big kind of cybersecurity incident that would completely floor the company. And did I know what to do if that happened? And again, at that point, I was thinking, Christ, I've never been a CISO. I've never managed a security function, but I've worked enough with the security team at Camelot to sound credible that I'd know the sorts of things that might happen and how we could respond to it. So, you kind of, as long as you have a little bit of prep work and then try and find those experiences in your past to then bring to those things. The fact that it was a CTO job, they didn't ask me about being a CTO. They asked me about other things than that. What happened at that point is I spent sort of 3 years at ETX, and they, being private equity owned, they were a bit cash strapped, as anyone who's worked at a tech startup will obviously appreciate. And they were looking for investment. I got a lot of exposure to trying to sell that business. We were doing presentations to investors, which was really exciting and interesting, working with corporate finance guys and all that sort of stuff. So I got a lot out of that experience, but ultimately they didn't find a buyer. And I kind of thought, I don't want to be sat here with basically no money to spend and squeezing costs for the next few years. So I started looking around again and got the job at Sporting Group, which is where I am now. What sort of interested me about the Sporting Group role was that ETX is a pure B2C business around spread betting on financial markets. Sporting Group is both a B2C and B2B business. So, it's very similar in that we're spread betting in the UK on sports markets, but the B2B business is all about providing pricing data to bookmakers. So again, it was a similar enough domain. It was all bespoke applications. So I was very familiar with that. The tech stacks are very familiar. It was like buzzword bingo in the interview. Oh, right, you got Mongo? Oh, yeah, I've got Mongo. Yeah, we got that. Oh, I got that. Yeah. So, all that sort of stuff helps, because if they'd been, I don't know, a big SAP shop, I would have been sat there thinking, I haven't done any work on SAP for years. It would have been too much different. So with Sporting Group, it was about twice the size of ETX. ETX was about 120 people. We're about 300 at Sporting Group. So I felt like it was a good opportunity to be responsible for a larger application landscape, and obviously, it's a group level role, so there's two child companies doing slightly different things for different tech stacks. It was also an opportunity to manage a much bigger team. My team here are about 73 people internally, and we work with about 40 people offshore through a number of partners who I've brought in. So, it's given me the opportunity to work with a lot more offshore companies. And to work, I've got a team in Cape Town. I've got 25 guys in Cape Town. So we have a lot more remote working, which is different to ETX, where we all sat in the same room. So, it gave me opportunities to grow in my career and to learn and experience new things. And I continue to do that. And I think that's sort of one of the key things when you're sort of looking at, is this role right for me, and how can I be successful in that? It's not just what you bring to the table that the company's going to benefit from, but it's also about, how am I going to learn something from this experience that progresses me as an individual? And, so what is it about this role which, I don't do at the moment, and I can be very honest about that, but I know enough about that I can then grow and, you know, and learn from that. So with Sporting Group, you know, they were looking for somebody to lead that whole technology resourcing strategy bit. So I just got straight onto you know, my various different networks, saying, you know, anyone got any good offshore partners they've worked with they could recommend, and spoke to a number of people, and then sort of now working with a company based out of Kiev, who we have a really positive, good relationship with. But I brought them to the table. So, you know, Sporting Group kind of got some good cheap offshore resources, and I got to experience bringing in a partner to an organization who weren't really used to working with third parties before. There's a few other things I suppose I want to highlight. I went when I was interviewing for Sporting Group. I also went for another job in as a CTO at a restaurant chain, and it was quite interesting because I kind of thought I could do this job. You know, it's quite straightforward. It's a team about 50 people, no problem. Tech stack sounds quite understandable. I can understand the challenges they've got, but you know, I think I've got a way through that. And I got down to the last two after about 7 interviews. It was just a slog, and in the end, I didn't get the job. They picked the other person, and I said to the headhunter, I said, you know, come on, you've got to give me something. I've invested so much. I really wanted this job. I mean, the pay was amazing. I mean, you know, I was just like, God, this is fantastic. And he basically said, look, you know, they would have taken either of you, and you know, there's probably nothing between you. But in the end, they opted for the other candidate. And you know, that's the way it goes sometimes. And he didn't really have anything concrete to give. It's just they had to make a decision and they chose the other person. So sometimes, you know, you beat yourself up because you don't get a job that you really, really want and you really feel you could do. And you're kind of like, but I love you guys. Why won't you employ me? And sometimes it's just down to luck. And, you know, don't be too disheartened by it. It's all good experience. And, you know, I learned that, you know, they were looking for a lot of interpersonal type stuff, and they were really interested in the person they were employing. So there was a lot of conversations about how would you deal with certain different situations. So I got a lot out of going through that interview process because it made me really think hard about, you know, my own being and the way I manage people, and why do I think, you know, I was good in that situation? What made me think that went well or that went badly? And a lot of self-reflection through that interview process. But ultimately, I didn't get that job, and you know, but I did one point think, was it because they were ultimately looking for somebody? Because at one point in the interview, they said, "Oh, would I be happy relocating to the US?" Because that's where the head office was. And you know, and I, you know, I've got 3 kids in school in North London, and I'm like, I'm not interested in relocating to the US, not now, but maybe in 10 years when the last child's at university. Yeah, absolutely. I'm quite happy to have a conversation then. So I was very upfront about that and said, look, you know, this is my situation. I'm not going to move my kids out of school. I think it's too important that they have a continuous education. That's what I value. So, you know, we could have this conversation in 10 years time, and I'd be happy to talk about, you know, what I could do if I moved to the US. But that's not going to happen now because I value, you know, keeping my wife and kids happy as much as I value getting an exciting job that is going to give me loads of money, you know. So and I think they accepted that, but it always nags at the back of your mind that, you know, was that the reason? Was that the thing that tipped the balance and they gave the job to the other person because they were more flexible? And I'll never know because they'll never admit that. But yeah, maybe it is. But ultimately, if I'd just gone, oh yes, of course I'll relocate to the US, and got the job, and then 2 months down the line they go, when are you relocating? I go, I don't want to do it. You know, that would have been a complete disaster for everyone. So being open and honest about your situation and getting the role that fits you and it is key. But ultimately, sometimes, you know, those choices go down to luck, and you'll never really know. The other thing, when Annie and I first started talking about this talk, I thought I'd do a little experiment because I love just trying things and seeing kind of what happens. And so I changed my LinkedIn profile to open to work, but only to the LinkedIn recruiters. So I didn't want to freak out my boss. Yeah. And so just to see kind of what reaction I'd get and who and what sorts of jobs in this current COVID-19 situation would get pushed at me. And it was an interesting sort of mix. Most of it was contact from recruitment agencies saying, or recruiters saying, you know, I'd like to increase my network. I get lots of opportunities, and we normally have to find people like you with your experience. So can I connect? But I don't have any jobs for you, type thing. So there's a lot of that. You kind of, okay. But there were a few people who sort of said, yes, here's a great job. And one of them was a CTO, a gambling company, but they were based in Brussels. And it was more sort of casino and that sort of online video slot game type stuff, which I'm not so interested in because I think it's down the slightly more risky end of the market, to be frank. But it's in Brussels, and not once in that email the guy sent to me did he address the fact that I live in London. And so, you know, he didn't start with, are you interested in a job in Brussels? Because that's the most important thing that I would want to ask a candidate. And I thought, you know, there's a lot of that sort of splattergun type stuff. But if I, you know, I didn't respond to him. But if I had done, I would have just gone, I'm not interested because I live in London. And I think, you know, I think just it's sometimes interesting to sort of open yourself up and see these things, and sometimes it's also interesting to apply for those jobs and go for a few interviews to get that interview practice. Because, you know, when that opportunity does come along where you think, oh, I could really do that, I'm an ideal candidate, it's the right point, it's a good time for me to switch and move, and it's a good, you know, progression for my career. You know, if you haven't had any practice at that point, you know, it's going to be tough to get it. So having a few kind of conversations with recruiters, and let's face it, recruiters are really good at interviewing because it's what they do all day long. So, you know, 15 minutes on a call with a recruiter, you know, will sharpen up your how do you present yourself, how do you present your experience, and especially when you get more senior in a business, it's less about the technology and knowing how to write good, elegant code. It's actually more about interpersonal skills and how do you deal with conflict, and how do you manage your people, how do you motivate your team to do the right things. So that's really more what they look for. And I think that's probably hard for certain technology people to get exposure to doing some of that if they're not managing a team or they've not done, you know, a lot of wide stakeholder management. So I guess sort of another nugget would be, you know, to look at opportunities in your existing role to get that wider experience, which maybe you think, actually, I've never been a product owner before. So why not just spend some time with a product owner to understand kind of how they go about prioritizing features or whatever it might be, or coming up with their 3-year roadmaps, and how do they communicate that? How do they get the language right? How do they do that presentation? If you've never done that before, you could spend some time with some product guys and try and learn from them. And then if a job comes up that's a CPTO, you know, Chief Product and Technology Officer, at least you can be honest and said, I've never been a product owner, but I've worked for 6 months, you know, every day with a guy who does that for his job, and I understand how to do that part of the role. And so I've got something there at least, and, you know, I can grow into it. So I think there are things you can do with your existing role which gives you that exposure if you ask for those opportunities, so you can be better prepared when you need to really kind of try and make that change and move to a bigger or more challenging role. I suppose the other thing is I talked a little bit about consistency of the sorts of opportunities you go to, and try not to change too many aspects of the role compared to what you're going now. One of the things I looked at many years ago was Facebook advertised for a CTO, you know, global CTO Facebook, you know, £500,000 a year type thing. I looked at it and went, bloody hell, that'd be brilliant. I'd love to have that job. Loads of money, Facebook CTO. What a great thing to have you on the seat. And I looked at the job spec, and I thought, okay, so they're looking for somebody who has managed over 1,000 people, worked in a global organization, you know, spoken at well-recognized conferences, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, whoa, you know, I've probably done one of those things they're looking for. There's a massive gap across the board, so I'm never going to even get considered. And I think that's quite interesting because, you know, you look at that and you look at the salary, and I was earning, well, I still don't earn anything like £500,000 a year, but you know, that was also the kind of big gap. And I think they would have looked at my current salary level and gone, nobody else values you at that level, so why should we? And I think sometimes, you know, when some of the jobs get advertised and you hear what the salary is, and you think, yeah, that's fantastic, love to have it, it's a big leap up. If it's too much of a gap, that will also work against you. So try not to be too over ambitious in some cases, because, you know, it sometimes it might just be too much of a stretch. But, you know, as I say, sometimes it comes down to luck, and if you get lucky and land that great job, then yeah, brilliant, well done. I think that was probably kind of all I had. I've been talking probably, well, for 40 minutes. That seems quite a long time. It went very quickly though. Maybe we could move on to a few questions though, Annie.
Yeah, that was really good, Pete. Thanks so much. We did actually have a couple of comments in there. So Stuart has said it's a difficult leap of faith moving from architect to CTO, learning to delegate and trust rather than having direct control. Is that something you found when you made that switch?
So I always love well, one of the things that keeps me going is that constant learning. So I'd never ask my team to do something that I didn't understand. So, you know, I can't write Scala code, but I understand that Scala is a functional language and it's a bit different from C#. So, you know, and it's a JVM stack versus a Microsoft stack. So I know enough about it that the people who write Scala code are probably going to struggle to write C# code, you know, straight away. But of course, you know, developers evolve and learn stuff quite quickly generally. So I love getting into the detail about things. So when we did a number of things at Sporting Group, including we're at the moment on a massive cloud first journey. So we're migrating a lot of our systems and re-architecting them into Google Cloud at the moment. And that whole Google Cloud ecosystem is a whole different lexicon of terms. And, you know, so just to understand what the hell the DevOps guys are talking about, I'm having to read and read and read. But I went on a Kubernetes administration course that Google ran with my senior management team, because I said, look, Kubernetes is going to be key to it. We need to go and learn how this stuff works. So we went on learning how to do sort of some basic things, you know, around pods and sidecars and spinning stuff up and scaling it and understanding enough about it. So now when, you know, we're trying to sort of direct and manage that team, we understand what they're doing, we understand how easy certain things are, but also how difficult a lot of things can be, or how much, you know, bedding in time they will need to get to the point where they are really, you know, production ready. So you do have to expose yourself to these to the detail, and I enjoy that, but also you have to then step back and not do those guys' jobs for them, because, you know, they're better prepared, they're more skilled, they're more experienced. So you kind of got to stop interfering, and I find that part of my job quite hard, because I like to keep diving back in and getting stuck in and going, oh, you know, surely you want to do it this way, and they're like, Peter, just leave us alone. We'll do it the way that we're going to do it, and trust us. So there's a bit about that. But if you don't keep diving back into the detail, then your team, I think, just end up seeing you as that person at the top of the tree, and you're not connected to reality. So when you then start saying, well, we've got this new strategy, we're going to move everything from Google to AWS because it's cheaper. And they'll go, but we're using a bunch of native services in Google, and, you know, it's going to be really hard. We have to rewrite them all into AWS. And, you know, so you end up looking like an idiot because you didn't understand what you were asking the teams to do. So I think that sort of trying to know how much you can get in there and work with the team, but then step back and let them get on with it, empower them, and to just measure them on the successes that they bring is really key. I also find that the other thing I reflect on with my engineering team, I've got a couple of engineering managers, well, head of engineering in my different locations, Cape Town, London, who manage a bunch of engineering managers, and their presentation skills are absolutely dreadful. You know, they're awful, and they hate standing up in front of a crowd. They will not stand up and do a town hall type session. because they just have the complete fear, and that's because they've never had the opportunity to do it or been pushed and encouraged to do it. So I'm trying to sort of encourage them tentatively to present a bit more and to structure their concepts and ideas better. Because if my heads of engineering can't do it, then I can't expect the engineering managers to be any good at it either. And so I'm trying to just improve their softer skills and their presentation skills, give them exposure to things like the annual budgeting cycle that we have with finance, so that they understand kind of what it means to pull a budget together, and work with finance on that, understand kind of capitalization of resources, so the whole CapEx OpEx split and why that's important, how we can put in for R&D credits, because all these sorts of things, if you're not exposed to it and then suddenly you're responsible for doing it, you kind of feel completely lost. So trying to just sort of give them those slightly wider experiences in my team, and then hopefully they'll all grow into being in charge of bigger engineering teams or taking on CTO jobs themselves.
Got more questions now. Did it feel like a trade-off moving from Camelot to a smaller organization, ETX, to move to the CTO role title?
I think it was interesting because Camelot at the time were recruiting for a CTO at group level, and I was really pissed off because I said I could do that job. Why am I being considered as an internal candidate? And HR basically turned around and said, we're looking to bring some external experience into the business. That is what the board has decided. They do not want an internal candidate. We want to bring some experience in to shape the overall group strategy. And I was only responsible for the UK business, not for the wider group as lead architect, chief architect. So, I was quite annoyed about that. And I think, I nowadays I sort of look back on it and think, I probably didn't want that job anyway, because it wasn't probably right for me. But I would have just ended up arguing with people all the time about the right things to do. And the guy who did take the role ended up basically doing things like, we should be using Google and Gmail. So he tried to convert the whole organization to Google and Google Enterprise, and they'd always been a Microsoft EA customer. So of course, everyone's just like, what are we doing that for? And it's just like, because all tech organizations use Google, that's what we should use. And that's where the pragmatism comes into it. I think, if I'd been him, I wouldn't have tried to push something like that through. I think it just pissed a load of people off, and he didn't stick around too long, I think, after that anyway. But I think that ETX just offered me, yes, it was more money, but it was just the opportunity to work more closely with private equity owners, to get exposure to that sort of type of industry, and I wanted to work more with agile teams, and that's what they were doing. I'd worked with one agile team at Camelot, and that was it. Everything else Camelot did was waterfall, and I just wanted to try and find something like that. But the sort of smaller startups, the sort of 30, 40 person companies, just wanted somebody who was going to be a hands-on coder, and I thought, I haven't written code for 20 years, and I'd be rubbish at it. I can't do that. And even now, when you look at the sorts of people that Facebook and Google are recruiting, they want people who have managed and grown engineering teams. So if you want to become an engineering director at Facebook, you need to have grown an engineering function from a handful of engineers to 300 or 400, and then they'll look at you as an engineering director. Otherwise, they'll look at you as an engineering manager. So I look at those sorts of opportunities and think, I don't want to become an engineering manager. I'm a CTO, but they go, in our language, an engineering manager is kind of like a CTO for a product line, because you could be responsible for WhatsApp. So you'd be the CTO of WhatsApp, basically, as an engineering manager. And you kind of go, oh yeah, I kind of get it. So they sort of change what is accepted as kind of a normal hierarchy of roles, which a lot of the other industries sort of work to, where you kind of understand, I know what a mid-level engineer is, I know what a senior engineer will be expected to do, I know what a head of engineering, a VP, a CTO, I kind of know what those roles will entail. But you go to a Facebook or Google and they're like, we do it our way, it's completely different. And it's really hard to then sort of map I don't know where I pitch myself in that hierarchy, because I don't understand the hierarchy and what's expected of each of the roles. So I think it's quite hard in some cases to move to a completely different sort of culture like that, where they sort of label things differently.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said in this market, more so than any other, really, that job titles only take you so far, and you really do have to look at the responsibilities involved as well, because the CTO in one company is a lead developer in another, and you really need to look at the role in more detail first, definitely. Andrew has asked, did you feel imposter syndrome when everyone looked to you for the answers?
I think it's funny because my wife is a psychotherapist, and so she's spent a lot of time helping me, obviously, in not giving me therapy but just helping me, and especially around self-reflection. And so she'll do that. Well, if you ever get stuck, just do that. That's interesting. What do you think? And just reflect back to someone. So if you do feel exposed because somebody asked you the question, it's kind of like, don't try and bullshit your way out of it. Just reflect back to them. Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. What do you think? What's your consideration? Then they'll probably tell you the answer that you should be giving them anyway. So I think with things like the live service thing, I remember I was walking. It really sticks to me because I was walking from the train back to my house at about 7 o'clock in the evening, and the CEO phoned me up, who was running home from the office, saying, the bloody systems are down. Why are they phoning me? What the fuck? Blah 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 blah. 15 minutes of effing and blinding at me, and then just slammed the phone down on me. And I was just like, I had no idea we even had a live issue, because I'd been on the tube, and of course, and then of course my phone's starting to light up with all the alerts. I was like, oh shit. But you kind of learn that you have to trust your team, but give them enough kind of responsibility that in that case the team weren't doing what they needed to do, because I hadn't told them that they were allowed to reboot the server, whatever it might be, and I hadn't really realized that everyone else was also traveling home at the same time, and there was nobody minding the shop at that point. And it was just bad timing, but sometimes you'll get kicked, but you kind of learn from it, and next time you have slightly better processes, and you come over looking like you're in more control. But I think there's still aspects of my job today where I feel massively exposed. At the moment, my boss, the CEO, is asking me for a resource plan. So tell me how many engineers we're going to need to deliver the business plans all the way through to the end of 2021, because I want to understand the cost profile and where we're getting the skills from, and all that sort of stuff. And I kind of go, okay, great. Can you show me the business plans? And you kind of get a one slide with some milestones on it, and you go, what the hell are these things? You got to give me a bit more detail. I can't give you a resourcing plan without it. But in the past, I would have gone, well, it's probably going to be, 6 developers for that bit. And so you come up with something, and then it's completely wrong because, you don't really understand what it is they want to do, because they haven't done the thinking yet, let alone communicate it to you. So I'm learning now that actually sometimes trying to be overly helpful doesn't always serve you too well. Because you end up backing yourself, digging a hole that you can't get out of. So sometimes you need to just push back and go, can we let product do their job first, come up with a plan, and I need this information, and then I'll do my bit. And being a bit robust about that is something I'm currently learning how to do.
That's a really good point, actually. Chris has asked, was the time you went client side the right time? Is there a right time, and could you have done it later?
I think that's quite interesting, because one of the things when I was looking to leave Capgemini because I didn't want to carry on working at HMRC, I interviewed at PwC and Deloitte, and because I thought, well, I'm just getting another job, different consulting company, and at PwC they were like, well, we'll go in and we'll sell you at sort of £2,000 a day and that sort of stuff. And I said, well, I feel a bit like a fraud, because Capgemini only charged me out at £1,200 a day, and actually Accenture used to charge me out at £1,800 a day. So, I feel really fraudulent asking a client to pay £2,000 a day for my time, because I don't think I'm worth it. And he was just kind of like, don't worry about that. The sales guys will just take care of it. And I just thought, I've got to a point in my career where I don't think I'm worth £2,000 a day. And so I'm going to feel really uncomfortable turning up that client site and thinking all those people look at me going, you better be not going to the toilet for 15 minutes because that's just cost us 50 quid. And I think that's something that I personally wasn't comfortable with, and I don't think I can get comfortable with that. So that's why I didn't stick in consulting. I think it's slightly different if you work for, you either work for yourself or you're very clear around the value you're bringing, and you construct a deal where it's results driven or something like that. But I think when you're on day rates of that sort of level, I mean, I wouldn't employ anyone at £2,000 a day as a consultant in my current job, because I just don't think it's worthwhile. But I know there's plenty of large FTSE 100 companies and merchant banks or whatever that, or corporate finance places that do, pay that kind of cash for people. I think you can get good people for a lot less. You just have to recognise it. But I think I wanted to live with my architecture decisions more. I wanted to feel what it felt like 3 years after go live, when that system was still working. You kind of thought, yeah, we did get the scalability bit right. Designed it on the back of a fag packet, but it was good enough. It was that satisfaction of seeing the results down the line, which you never got as a consultant.
And Stuart has asked, how do you manage personal stress levels, i.e. corporate governance things which keep you up at night, such as security, GDPR, customer confidentiality? God, he's listed a lot of examples. Today's Twitter hack, for example, disgruntled employees, everything. Oh, red wine. Red wine is the answer. Andrew, sorry.
It's a good answer, actually. Yes, I mean, my CFO called me a functioning alcoholic the other day. And I said, oh, come on, it's high functioning alcoholic at least. No, I think because we both enjoy a drink. I mean, I think alcohol can help in the evening, but more so just not bringing office back home is important. It's really hard when you've got one of these things that keeps pinging. So, I mean, I tend to have my phone on silent at home, and I turn it off overnight. And I'm kind of like, at the end of the day, very early in my career, I decided I never wanted to work in a company or system where something I did might result in somebody dying. So I never wanted to work on air traffic control systems. I never wanted to work on anything really to do with life support in healthcare. I was just like, I don't want to do something where an architecture decision results in somebody dying. Now, you could argue that I'm now working in the gambling industry, and that is quite detrimental to a lot of people's health. So yeah, I take that point, but I'd say that's probably no different from working for a Diageo or a company like that, which obviously there are bad and good things to the product. But I think ethically I've got quite a grounded base. I like to think I have. But equally I do sleep well at night. I don't have that many sleepless nights because I learned quite early on to just turn off, and I do that in my own way at home by watching TV. So in the evening, I'll pretty much watch an hour or so of TV before I go to bed, because that's how I basically calm my brain down and detune. If I don't have that hour of TV, if I go to bed, I'll tend to sit there, just my mind will be buzzing and I won't go to sleep. So I've got myself into a mental routine that if I follow, then yeah, I could just leave it all behind and I'm asleep within 5 or 10 minutes of hitting the pillow. My wife, by contrast, will read in bed, and that's how she detunes and relaxes. So whatever kind of works for you, but find what works for you to relax and then do it, as habit, and then you can leave it all behind. As far as the security concerns go, I'm kind of like, look, I know there are circumstances where you could go to jail for certain things, especially around money laundering. But I usually try and pass those responsibilities over to the CFO. When we've had big security incidents, you kind of just got to just take it all in context and go, yeah, okay, so we had a breach, we lost some customer data, or some customer data was exposed inadvertently, but at the end of the day, nobody died because of it. Yes, it was bad. We're going to try and improve and learn and do it, but it happens to everybody. Don't take it personally. You know, at ETX, we had Chinese customers because we had a global customer base, and we used to get DDoSed all day long, and we used to have all sorts of horrible crypto type attacks and all sorts of stuff. Because, you know, if you pissed off some Chinese gamblers, they'd just launch a load of stuff at you. With the UK customer base, our sporting group, we're pretty benign. Like hardly anyone ever takes a pop at us, because actually we know all our customers, we know where they live, we credit check them. You know, yes, you might find some outside interest, but because we geofence our website, you know, you can't do an awful lot outside of this country on our website because we're not, you know, only licensed in the UK. So it is visible in other jurisdictions, but you can't log in, you can't register, can't create an account. So actually we're kind of quite a low profile organization in that respect. So we don't have so many incidents. So I don't worry so much about that. But we also we rely quite heavily on third parties. So we work with Dell SecureWorks, and they provide us with consultancy, and you know, they'll warn us on different types of attacks that they're seeing happening, and we'll kind of look at whether or not we think that's going to be a problem for us or not before it, you know, potentially is a problem for us. So yeah.
I think one of the best things you said there was turning off your phone, which is something we all need to do a lot more. I think especially with remote working, there's that distance between work and home isn't there anymore. So just turning off your computer, one of the best ways you can de-stress, in my opinion.
There was an interesting conversation actually in a CTO network that I'm in. They were talking about burnout, where, you know, you kind of work more and more hours because you want to get on and you want to progress in your career. So you just keep putting the hours in, and you basically will burn out. What will happen is that your colleagues will recognize that way before you do, and they'll just see you overworking and making odd decisions and just behaving erratically, or drinking too much or whatever it might be. They'll notice it way before you do. And so, you know, when somebody does kind of have that quiet word of, you know, maybe you want to have some time off, listen to them, take a break. You know, my boss is very keen that even though, you know, a lot of people have cancelled their holidays, that people are still taking their holidays on a regular basis through COVID-19. So he's been insisting that even people whose travel arrangements have been disrupted over Easter and stuff, you know, do take 3 or 4 days off, because, you know, they need that break. They can't just work continuously for 6 weeks or 6 months without some sort of holiday. So you've got to give your time to recharge, you know, and I'm getting to a point now where I'm really looking forward to my holiday in 3 weeks time, and hopefully it won't get cancelled. But, you know, and if it does, I'm just going to still take some time and we'll just detune at that point. But, you know, I have my phone with me on holiday, and I'll look at it every day, and I'll look at emails, and it's really hard not to. But, you know, equally, you know, nothing really goes to pot when I'm not around, because I trust my team. So I know they're dealing with it, even if I see those Slack alerts going over and over again. I'm thinking, oh, they just need to do this. You know, I'll help them. And you're like, no, they'll work it out. It's all right. You know.
Importance of having a good team, absolutely. And if we make this just our last couple of questions, guys, one from Wasim. What are some of the key skills that you've learned recently, and are there any skills gaps that you wish you had learned before your CTO days?
I think looking back at my career, when I was at Capgemini, so you know, 10 to 14 years into my career, because I had a lot going on, having children, that sort of stuff, I really took my foot off the learning bit. So the technology world moved on, and I didn't move with it. So when I went for some of those interviews, when I was looking for a new job after Capgemini, especially when I went for an interview at Deloitte, one of their partners came to me and was asking me about infrastructure. You know, like, what do you know about the latest storage technology? And I was like, oh yeah, I know loads about that. And blah, blah, blah. And it was kind of like, that was about 5 years old, mate, you know. Everyone else is doing something different now. And I felt like a complete idiot, because, you know, I hadn't kept in touch with what all the major vendors were doing, and, you know, and how people were viewing things differently now. So, you know, I think you have to keep in touch with major things. You can't keep in touch with everything, obviously, I'm putting all my effort into Google, but I think what's interesting about that is our Google technical account manager, who's supposed to be kind of this solution architect guy. Whenever we ask him a question, all he does is go and ask someone else the answer, because they all know their little bit, and nobody really kind of knows how all of it fits together, because there's 30 odd products and all that sort of stuff. And you kind of want to know, what's the best technology, what's the best database if I want to do this. Oh, I'll go and ask the guy who manages this, and the guy who does BigQuery, and the guy who does Spanner, and we'll come back to you with an answer. Or you end up with a conference call with 4 people on it. And that's quite interesting, because you kind of think, if they can't share that knowledge effectively internally, what the hell hope have I got? So you kind of read a lot, but the documentation online only goes so far, and if you're not on that happy path, it doesn't help you at all. And then trying to get help from them is really painful. So I think there's still quite a lot to do on that Google side, but I'm trying to do what I can there. The other thing is I have a modeling team who basically build all the mathematical models that generate the probabilities that then generate the odds for betting. So, they build models around sports that will predict the outcome of a particular match, depending on what's happening at that match. And it's quite a complicated thing, but they're empirically derived models, which basically they mean that they built something based on typically a Poisson distribution, and then they bundling more variables, and they tweak it, and it's evolved over 20 odd years, and a lot of cases, and lots of inputs and things like that. What we've done recently is we've invested in the Data Robot machine learning platform, and we're trying to use machine learning techniques to come up with new models for aspects of that model. We couldn't, for example, give Data Robot a bunch of football data and say, produce me a football model that's going to predict number of goals per football game, because it just wouldn't be very accurate. However, it's quite good if you give it a bunch of data about players and say, tell me how many minutes this player is going to play typically in this game, because that will have an influence on how likely he is to score a goal. And it's probably more so in sports like basketball, where players will typically play 2 quarters or 4 quarters. So it's quite polarized data set, but machine learning will give you some quite good insight into that data much quicker than trying to build an empirical model around that. So we've been getting those maths guys to use that to build some player props models, as we've called them, around points in a basketball game by player and those sorts of things. And the speed at which we can do that now is fascinating. But I've been trying to learn lots about the different types of algorithms that it's coming up suggesting for modeling that sort of scenario. And that's quite intellectually difficult to get your head around, having not been exposed to algorithms for a very long time, not since A-level maths, frankly.
I think that's good though as well, isn't it? Because the key thing there is that even if you get to CTO or whatever your career goal is, dev manager, head of architecture, whatever, there's always different ways you can progress, and it's not just upwards, it's outwards as well, and it's broadening and expanding your skill set, which is really important. And also what you said earlier about communication skills as well, so it's not just the technical side but softer skills as well. So there's always something you can be doing that's different and new, and that's another way you can continue to progress.
It's quite hard watching, it can be painful watching the modelers try to explain to the traders why the model is predicting a particular outcome, when the traders sat there going, nah, Arsenal will never score another goal, they're rubbish. That team selection they've got is awful, they'll never get another goal, they've not got a strike on the pitch, the model's wrong. And you kind of go, no, the model is probably more correct than your view on this game. It's quite interesting.
No, I can imagine that. But I think we'll wrap up there, because that seems to be the end of our questions. But thanks so much, because that was really good. We've got lots of positive comments in here saying really helpful. Thank you for your honest answers, interesting insights, really good nuggets of wisdom. So honestly, that was really, really good. And this one obviously has been recorded, so if you want to watch it all again, you can when it's uploaded next week. Thanks again, Peter, because that was great.
Well, no, thank you all for listening. Always happy to share. I think it's a great way of trying to help and contribute back.
Well, thanks so much, guys, and have a good rest of your evening.